Welcome back, my Be Health Empowered family, to another week of our show, Excuse Me, Doctor. My name is Dr. Melissa Clark. Please call me Dr. Mel. I am delighted to be back here with you this week. And we're here every week, Mondays, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, doing what we do here at Excuse Me, Doctor, talking with you about your health and well-being. We base all the information we give you on the science and the evidence so that you can be confident and empowered to make the decisions that are best when it comes to your health and do it for yourself, your family, and your community. We clarify speculation, we clear up misinformation, and we debunk disinformation. And we also let you know when things might change as we learn and increase our knowledge, because that's what science is all about. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. Thanks for joining us on one of those platforms. And if it's your first time, welcome to you. And I ask that you hit like if you're joining us on Facebook and subscribe if you're joining us on YouTube. I really appreciate you for doing that. And then if you have questions about anything that you hear tonight on the show, just type it in the chat and we're going to get to you in the latter third of the show. We're going to take all your questions and answer them on a first come, first served basis. So start typing them in now as they come to you. Without any further ado, we are about to create an amazing week for ourselves with the health topics we're going to cover tonight. And as always, I have to bring in my fabulous co-producers, Miss Lila Mays and Mr. Wayne Bruce.
Hey.
Howdy.
Hey,
What's
how y'all
going on?
doing?
Good. Happy Monday.
Yeah, happy Monday. We are ready to
Happy
go.
Monday. Ready
We
to go?
are. What are we talking about today, Dr. Mel?
Well, we have a fantastic guest who is going to talk with us tonight about obesity. Is it a disease? Can it be treated? Is it just a matter of calories in, calories out? A lot of people are having questions about weight, especially this time of year when people are making New Year's resolutions. So we're going to talk all about it. And he's coming to us, our special guest is coming to us from George Washington University's culinary medicine program. So we're going to hear about food as medicine. So it's going to be real good, y'all.
Oh,
Awesome.
anytime we talking about food, I'm with it.
Right.
I am there.
So make sure everybody shares it. Share it with anybody you know who wants to know and get a better handle on their weight, understand more about whether overweight and obesity is a disease. People who just want to commit to a healthier lifestyle and healthier eating, join us tonight. Share it with all of them.
Share it with everyone.
Indeed.
Share.
Tell your people.
Tell your
All right.
peoples. Tell your peoples. We in the house.
Yeah. So is it time for the weekly recap?
Let's get it on. Let's get to the weekly recap. All right, here we go.
All right. Well, as you all know, we always start off with the numbers, where we are. So COVID cases, they're coming down. We're down to 716,000 new cases a day. So that's down from a high of 1.125 million cases a day. It seems like it's peaking. The case count is peaking in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic and some other large population centers around the country. But there's still rural areas where Omicron peak has yet to happen, and they are still getting slammed with numbers of cases going into the hospital, so hospitalizations, and also, unfortunately, deaths. We're at 866,000 deaths from COVID-19. And the death count, the daily death count around the Omicron variant still hasn't peaked because, as you know, that lags behind the case numbers. So we're closing back in on about 2,000 deaths a day from COVID, which is, we haven't seen that peak since last September. So, yeah, it's, I see people, spiking the ball in the end zone and talking about, everybody's going to have Omicron and, we're going to get herd immunity. I think we're definitely counting our chickens before they're hatched, and we are still in it. right now,
Right.
and still have to double down on our mask wearing and our vaccinations.
Everybody's acting like Aaron Rodgers. They knew Aaron Rodgers was going to win, but whoops, he didn't.
I knew you were going to find some kind of way to bring football in here.
Hey,
After I said
was
spiking the
amazing.
ball.
I mean, listen, we can't act like it wasn't an amazing, amazing football weekend. It was an amazing
Yes,
football
it was. It was. It was. I mean, even President Biden weighed in on it, apparently,
weekend.
and
Listen,
said something about Aaron Rodgers. But, he is not going to the Super Bowl. We know that.
no, he is not.
He's immunized against the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Apparently so.
All right.
Speaking of immunized, though, we should probably talk about those vax facts, huh?
We should definitely get into some facts, Dr. Mill.
So we are at 67.4% of the population over 5 being fully vaccinated, meaning they've had 2 doses, and 40% of people over 18 have had a booster. And so just want to put that booster reminder out there that it overwhelmingly protects against the symptoms of Omicron infection or infection with COVID-19 virus. And it feels more like a cold if you're boosted. If you have 2 vaccines, it feels more like a flu, but you're not sick enough to get hospitalized. But for those individuals who are not vaccinated, there's still 3 times the rate of death from Omicron compared to people who have had 2 vaccinations, 5 times the rate of death for those who've been boosted. And in DC numbers, because I sit on the Vaccine Advisory Task Force for DC, so there is almost a 40 times rate of hospitalization for people who are not vaccinated compared to those who are boosted or double vaxxed. So it's real. It's all the story is all in the numbers.
Yeah, I think you know what, Dr. Mill. I think we'll have to take some of those bullets and get them up on social media because I think they're really, really important for us to continue to talk about and see. Boosted and vax definitely helps with the symptoms, right? And it being fatal. So yeah, Dr. Mill, I am tasking
and
myself.
also, I was going to also throw in there and long COVID too.
And long COVID.
Prevention of people getting long COVID and the disease that children get, the MIS-C disease, the inflammation after they've gotten an infection like a couple weeks later. So, yeah.
Okay, so speaking of COVID, which we always do, that's how this show started.
Right.
Listen, I have wanted to do a couple of little things, but I've been really hesitant about some elective surgery in the times of COVID. What should I be that cautious, Dr. Mel? What are some of the outcomes for elective surgery post COVID?
Okay, so this is relevant only if you've had COVID.
Had COVID.
If you've already if you've had COVID and you're thinking about getting elective surgery, which is sort of like optional surgery. So those are for people with non-emergencies, for example, like a back surgery or a knee replacement based upon wear and tear issues in your body. So it's found that people who had COVID less than 7 weeks ago, if they go get surgery, they have a 3 times higher risk of complications and death after surgery as compared to people who never had COVID or people who had COVID more than 7 weeks ago.
Wow.
Why might that be? Well, we know that COVID puts us at higher risk for blood clots in our body. We also know that when you have surgery, especially surgery that specifically on orthopedic surgery like back repairs and knee repairs and hip repairs, you have a higher risk of blood clots as well. So those 2 things combined are probably what's leading to this observation. So even the Professional Society of Anesthesiologists are suggesting that people delay elective surgery if they've had COVID recently. And so for the public, for everybody listening, it's important to let your doctor know if you're thinking about having an optional surgery, that how recently you've had COVID, or that you've had COVID and how long it's been, and to delay it at least 7 weeks, or until you are fully recovered.
Wow.
That's good to know.
Yes,
Keep
absolutely.
keep it in line with the COVID risk. A plant-based diet by eating healthy can have an effect on COVID.
Yeah. So this was a study out of Massachusetts General Hospital up in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed that um, people who had a healthy plant-based diet um, were at lower risk for getting COVID, about a 9% lower risk. Um, and that's getting infected. And there was a 41% lower risk of developing severe COVID. Now, this was in a database. This was kind of back in 2020. Most of this data was gathered. So that was with the original strain and the early variants, but that's
Mm-hmm.
still pretty impressive numbers. And that was, you might say, well, people who are well off are going to be eating a healthier diet, a plant-based diet anyway. So there might be these other factors that are associated with, you know, being well resourced that might have had that effect. Well, actually, that's not the case. It was consistent across health behaviors, across other social determinants of health. You might have heard us use that term on the show. So, you know, access to healthy food, transportation, where you live, how much money you make, what your education level is, and also how prevalent the virus was in your community. So it's important, I think, that we understand this concept of maximizing our health, because together with vaccination, it cuts way down on our personal risk of of getting sick, or if we get in contact with the coronavirus.
Hmm.
Vaccination, though, is still very important because it minimizes the spread. So your diet is great because it enhances your own personal ability to mount an immune response,
Okay.
but the vaccine is still important to layer on top of that to make sure that we're not spreading the virus as much.
Okay.
All right.
Um, I found this one really, really interesting. Reproductive health issues and them being a foreshadowing, possible foreshadowing to later heart disease. Let's talk about that, Dr. Mill.
So, this surprised me, right? Because I'm like
Mhm.
in this, I look up these studies. I found that this information was in the literature going back to 2003, almost 20 years ago. And so
Oh, wow.
the reason why I'm featuring it tonight is because recently there was a publication that looked at all the studies over the past 20 years, and they all are saying the same thing, right?
Right.
Basically, that reproductive risk factors in women are associated with later in life heart disease or cardiovascular disease, which includes strokes and high blood pressure and heart attacks.
Hmm.
It included everything from getting your period really early, to contraceptive use, to gestational diabetes and pregnancy, preterm birth, miscarriage. All these things were associated with higher risks of heart disease or cardiovascular disease later in life. So let's group them together: preeclampsia, stillbirth, miscarriage, and preterm birth. That's a twofold increase in cardiovascular risk.
Hmm.
Gestational hypertension, so high blood pressure in pregnancy. Placental abruption, that means if the placenta separates from the uterus before your baby is born.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Gestational diabetes, those were associated with a 1.5 to 1.9 increase. And getting your period early, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and early menopause were associated with a 1.5 times increase. The one good
Wow.
news was that if you breastfed, and you breastfed for a longer period of time, that decreased your risk of heart disease later in life. So the main point is not to scare people, but if any of these things pertain to you, you should be having a conversation with your doctor about, hey, I heard that this might, when I get into my 40s, 50s, and 60s, that this puts me at a higher risk for heart disease. What can we be doing now to decrease my risk of heart disease? And working in partnership with your doctor on that plan.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
So this, because I cook a lot and I use the oil of the olive, this was cool. You heard an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, recently they were talking about olive oil keeps the doctor away.
Yeah, so this was pretty cool too. So the American College of Cardiology found that people who consume more than half a tablespoon of olive oil a day were less likely to die from cardiovascular disease, which we just defined, cancer, dementia, and respiratory illnesses. And that if you replace things like margarine, butter, mayonnaise, dairy, fat with the equivalent amount of olive oil, it led to people in this particular study having a 34% lower risk of death from all causes. So notice I didn't put other vegetable oils in that list. So the association didn't hold true for other vegetable oils. So yeah, that was really important. The other thing they found that people who had a higher olive oil consumption typically were more physically active, less likely to smoke, consumed more fruits and vegetables, but they also controlled for all those factors and still found that this was the case. So the ways that you can get in more olive oil, you could cook with it, like Wayne just said, bake with it. You can add it to your food or on your bread, for example. So use olive oil instead of butter. You can use it on your salad dressing. So there are different ways that you can try to get it in.
Have you heard of people just taking it straight to the dome? Give me a
That
tablespoon of olive oil.
That's so funny because I was on the Russ Parr Morning Show this morning and they asked me that same question. They were like, "Oh, I'm glad that you mentioned there are these other ways to get it in," because I was just going to go get me a spoon and just dip it in olive oil.
Straight to, we taking it straight to the dome. We
We're
taking
taking it
some olive
straight.
oil every day.
Right,
I mean,
right.
listen though, if you have some good olive, if you have some good olive oil,
So
listen,
Well,
you should
the
drink
other thing
it
I
along
like to
with
do
this.
is combine it with balsamic vinegar and dip my toast in it. That's
Yeah.
another way to do it. Your pita bread or whatever you want to do. So that's another way to get it in. But
a
um,
tablespoon. Is it a
I
tablespoon or half a table?
half a tablespoon a day
Okay.
more. Yep, exactly. And substituting it for other things that are not as healthy, like the margarine and the mayonnaise,
Oh,
etc.
okay. So
Yeah.
we're not going to hear, that at the end of of those commercials, like for Olestra and all that, may cause all these things. We're not going
Oily
to have any
discharge.
oily discharge. We don't want
No,
that. Okay.
no.
I'm just checking. Hey, Lila, I, 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 I hear and see you.
You had to ask. I know
I,
I'm right here.
I had to
You had
ask because
you had to
it could be problems for some people.
all right.
No, I think we're pretty good on the olive oil. So,
Yeah.
Okay,
so
fantastic.
what time is it?
You know what time is it? It is as Morris Day would say. What time is it?
What time is it?
The weekly debunk. Stopping misinformation in its tracks.
So tonight, Tanisha Twitterfinger said, Governor DeSantis said it's ridiculous making young women like nurses who are trying to get pregnant get a vaccine. I told y'all that vaccine causes infertility.
I don't know about that. Excuse me, Dr. Mel. Is that true?
It's really a shame that politics are so closely intertwined with public health, but that's where we are right now. And I'll just repeat because we've done other debunks on this, but this was actually said recently. And so I think, as Tanisha pointed out, we need to point out that there is no link between the COVID-19 vaccines and infertility. There's no basis for the governor saying that other than perhaps politics. No animal studies have shown it. No studies of humans undergoing fertility treatment have shown it. No COVID vaccine trials have ever found an association between the vaccine and lowered fertility rates. And there's no association between COVID-19 vaccine and miscarriage risk. And so just last week, a new study came out and confirmed all this. They looked at over 2,000 women aged 21 to 45 in the US and Canada, and they enrolled both them and their partners. About 3/4 of them, of everybody participating, had at least one vaccine. And they saw no association between having been vaccinated against COVID-19 and the probability of conceiving a child within one menstrual cycle. Actually, the opposite was true. What they saw was couples in which the man had tested positive for COVID within 60 days, they were 18% less likely to conceive in that menstrual cycle than people where the man hadn't had COVID. So, we know that the virus has been found in the testicles. We know in rare instances, some studies have shown that it's associated with erectile dysfunction. So we don't know what that was about. But what we do know is that COVID-19 vaccine is not associated with fertility. And yet another study has come out to endorse that.
All right.
So that's our debunk for the week.
Somebody said when Tanisha gets her MD, she can speak on it.
Well, I'm just glad that Tanisha's in touch with us and asks her questions every week.
Indeed.
We need that open dialogue going on. So, well, that's it for our debunk. Thank you, Wayne and Lila. We're going to see y'all really soon back again. And I'm going to launch into our show for this week, which, as we mentioned at the top of the hour, is all about obesity, understanding obesity. Is it a disease? Is it just calories in, calories out? What is it all about? And how can we best address it? I know a lot of us are having our New Year's resolutions right now. They include losing weight. And so we have a fantastic guest with us tonight, Dr. Kofi Essel. He is the director of the culinary medicine program at the George Washington University School of Medicine. He's an experienced community pediatrician, content creator, and an academic who's had national recognition in addressing obesity and food insecurity in families. Welcome, Dr. Essel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I know have a lot to talk about, so let's just jump right into it. Can you define obesity for us?
Yeah, great question. And I appreciate the way you framed this conversation. I think it's an important way to frame it. When we think about obesity, I typically define it to my students, to my families, as obesity is sort of a multi-system, complex, chronic disease that affects the body in multiple different ways, right? When you think about obesity, when we think about the definitions we typically use, we use the BMI calculator, right? The idea of measuring one's height compared to one's weight, right? And then when you kind of look at that, or really weight over height, but either way, you're comparing one's height and weight together, and you're kind of coming up with sort of absolute numbers. Is BMI a perfect measure? No, it's not, right? So just by looking at someone's BMI, you cannot tell if they are healthy or not healthy or what degree they are. I think we try to assume a lot from looking at individuals, but we don't really know anybody's story by looking at someone. And I think it's important that we do not do that and stigmatize others by doing that. I use the word complex because the idea of obesity being a disease is important to really understand and realize. Typically, when people think about obesity, sometimes they think about it as a behavior issue, or somebody uses the term a moral failing, right? But understanding it as complex really starts to blow that up. The way this works is not calories in versus calories out alone. Calories in versus calories out is part of the picture. And if you think about it, like typically you think about 3,500 calories equals about a pound. And most people say if you consume about 500 extra calories a day, you'll gain about a pound a week, right? 500 over 7 days. If you reduce by exercise or eating less, about 500 extra calories a day for about a week, you'll lose about a pound a week. And that might work for some degree to a little bit of an extent, but then that stops working. The body does something unique. What it does is what it's called, it protects the set point. This set point that the body has gotten used to, this what we call adiposity, the fat cells in the body have gotten a certain size and the brain has gotten used to that size. The body will do everything it can to get you to that point once again, even if you
Mhm.
lose weight, right? Makes you colder, makes you more hungry, makes you all kinds of changes happen as a result to get you back to that point. So we
Yeah.
understand this to be a disease. It's complex. It's not as simple as we say it is in society.
Right. I think what you're talking about when you talk about adiposity and the fat cells is what's in the common vernacular set known as "a minute on the lips, forever on the hips." I think I think unfortunately that's what you're talking about. Um, so you mentioned that BMI is not a great way to assess obesity. Are there other ways to assess obesity?
I'm not going to say it's not a great way. It's not the most. It's not completely accurate. Let's just say
It's
that.
not
And
foolproof. Yeah.
it's not foolproof. And I'll give you an example. There's certain communities, for example, certain Asian subcommunities in particular, where the number BMI for what we call obesity is 30, right? Above 30, we consider that to be in the obesity category. But we see some higher risk in the category of around 26, 27 even, right? In some of these other communities, right? Or even in African American households, sometimes you see higher numbers, higher than 30, before you see increased risk. And when I say increased risk, that means the fat cells start to become more hazardous on the body, start to wrap around the organs, start to cause more inflammation in the body, start to cause a lot more what we call chronic disease in the body. So we
Mhm.
know just by looking at the number alone, the BMI cutoff alone, it doesn't tell us everything. And we have to think about this in a more holistic way.
Yeah. So you bring up a couple of points I wanna delve into. What are some of the chronic, consequences of obesity?
Yeah, chronic diseases that we often associate with obesity, things like hypertension, so higher blood pressure, right? We talk about things like prediabetes and diabetes, right? We talk about things like heart disease. We talk about kidney disease, and the list goes on and on and on. In particular, even we start to really explore these areas of cancers as well. There's a number of different cancers that we're starting to explore and understand that they are associated with increased weight gain as well, especially for longer periods of time. So we see all these things very commonly. Unfortunately, sometimes people only look when somebody is in the category of obesity, but at the same time, we know that there is a clear association with disease and obesity being a trigger to some of these other diseases.
Right, absolutely. And then the other part that I wanted to unpack a little bit is you mentioned Asians and the set point for BMI and the risks. So I want to talk about obesity in different subgroups, especially African Americans. I mean, we know we've heard people say, "Well, I'm just big boned," or "All my
Mhm.
family is big boned." W- What is the genetic link around obesity? Is there one? And, is there a different set point, for people of African descent?
Great question. So there are definitely associations of what we call genetics and epigenetics, sort of micro details about an individual's genetics and how that passes on from generation to generation. The reality is, when you look at sort of the epidemic that we call the obesity epidemic and sort of the changes over the last 30, 40, 50 years, we can't link that directly to genes by themselves, but we do know on the individual level, there is a lot of genetic association that we see. In terms of set point, we don't describe in the research a difference between the set point of, say, African American populations versus Asian populations versus white American populations in particular. So the set point is not necessarily what we would say they're different. What we would say is the risk for disease based on the BMI criteria. One of the interesting studies that we often talk about is a study that was done with the Biggest Loser contestants. The Biggest Loser is a show that many people know, was on for years, went out and then came back. One of the things that I often tell my students is, have you ever seen a reunion episode? Have you ever seen what happens when the lights go off, when people go back home? The assumption is, oh, people, quote unquote, are not working hard enough. They're not doing what they should be doing. And as a result, they're probably going to gain their weight back. But when you study this, there was one interesting study that was done a few years ago, and it took about 14 contestants who had finished The Biggest Loser, and they all lost a significant amount of weight. And then you saw this slow increase in weight over time. And you're like, what is going on? And of course, the assumption was you need to exercise more. You need to, eat less food. You need to eat more plants. You just need to do what I do, and then everything would be fine. The reality is the body is doing something unique and different. The same time as the weight would seem to go up, right? Everybody seemed to lose and keep off about 5 to 10% of their weight, which is known to be associated with significant benefits overall for the body. But in general, we saw something happening. Their metabolism slowed down. We saw that hunger hormones began to increase. We saw that satiety or our fullness hormones began to decrease. We know that that goes on as a result of these weight changes that our body does see to get back to that set point idea.
Yes, absolutely. No, that makes perfect sense. So, what are some of the other determinants? You talked about hormones. Um, I know that in my introduction to you, we mentioned food insecurity and that you
hmm
talk about food insecurity when it comes to families. We talked about genetics. What are some of the environmental um, uh, triggers or factors that factor into larger numbers of overweight and obese people in the African American community?
Um, Great question. What I want to do is I'll start downstream, what I call at the ground level, and then I'll go up a little bit. So when I think downstream, there's a lot of different factors that people don't often think about. Again, people lean heavily on, oh, you need to run more, you need to eat better. And we know that over time, over the last decade or so, the calorie intake of individuals has decreased over time. We know that sugary drinks has decreased over time, but we know the weight continues to go up. So it's not just simply these simple modalities that we tend to lean on. Oftentimes, we also need to think about stress. We need to think
Yep.
about sleep, right? Getting enough sleep in one's lifestyle, the stress reduction. Certain medicines that me as a physician often gives can oftentimes trigger weight gain, right? Changing that set point. Not only the quantity of food, the calories, but the quality of food, the processing of foods. We see that sometimes people don't feel full after they eat very processed foods, and they end up eating a lot more than they actually wanted to because they don't feel full. That the body doesn't recognize those things as real food. So on the ground level, there's a variety of those factors that we often think about. When you go upstream and think about the environment, you mentioned the word social determinants of health, and I think that thinking either social determinants, social influencers of health, there's a variety of different ways we describe them. But basically, these environmental conditions in which people live, they work, they play, they pray, that influences their overall health. These environmental conditions influence one's health, in addition to influence ultimately one's behaviors as well. And I think it's important to understand those things. You mentioned food insecurity. Food insecurity, I would tie into other triggers that have led to that: racism, housing segregation, poverty. All of these factors that we know lead into food insecurity. And food insecurity, for those who don't know it, is purely hunger, right? It's another way of describing it is hunger. And hunger, the rates of hunger in this country are incredibly high. In Black and Brown communities, 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 individuals in households experiencing rates of hunger when you talk about households with children. So super high, something we really are worried about. And we know that when someone is experiencing hunger, they have a constant preoccupation with where their next meal is going to come from. Their quality of food begins to decrease, where the variety begins to change. They're getting less of a variety of foods. The nutritional value begins to decrease. The caloric density or the caloric richness of foods begins to increase. Why? Well, the food system just so happens to be created in a way, and I said intentionally created, right? Because we can do something about it, but it's intentionally created in a way where a lot of times foods that are higher in caloric density, that have a lot of flavor and are created and designed to stimulate the brain, end up being much cheaper. And foods that
Right.
are, don't last as long, fruits and vegetables, beans, nuts, legumes, seeds, these things end up being more expensive. And as a result, we tend to lean towards foods that have higher taste, higher, less cost, and are easy to cook and convenient to access. And oftentimes that leads into this sort of description of increased caloric burden without getting the right nutrients that we need.
Right. Right. And therefore the weight follows. So tell us about, with all this in mind, tell us about culinary medicine. What is that, and how does it address some of these issues that we've been talking about?
Culinary medicine is a very exciting, novel field. I got into the space a few years ago when I started doing community cooking classes, and I found something interesting. It was interesting because I realized that I've done a lot of sort of community nutrition work over the years, and you do these, you cook, you put food in the blender, you pass out food around, you do a little food demo, you do all this kind of stuff, you make sandwiches with people, but when you got in that kitchen and people started getting in there and cooking on that stove, dicing things up, it changed the game completely. You saw people keep coming back. You saw people very excited to learn more. And you saw people implementing these things into their everyday life because they had the lived experiences, the practical experiential learning that they were able to
Mm,
then apply into their everyday life. So I think the
right.
idea of applying culinary cooking skills into one's life is so powerful. The way culinary medicine works is at the basic level, it's basically bringing together the art of cooking and food together with the science of nutrition and medicine. Right? You bring the two
Wow.
worlds together, and we realize that it has great potential to impact the health of populations. Food, in particular, poor diet, is one of the leading risk factors for poor health outcomes and for mortality, for death. And
Hmm.
this very tool, food, that we know is so powerful to influence the health of patients and families, oftentimes in medical training, we don't learn too much about it. So
At
oftentimes what
all.
we end up passing, we don't learn much at all about it. So what
Yeah.
we end up passing on to our families is what? Stuff that we do for ourselves, stuff that we learn from Dr. Oz, stuff that we learn from reading this book. We tried the keto, we tried this, we tried that, and it worked for
Mhm.
me. Look at me. So I'm going to pass it on to my family. And as a
Mm.
result, oftentimes we go with a very stigmatizing approach, very top down approach, very sort of simplistic understanding of understanding the topic of nutrition, food, disease, even obesity. With culinary medicine, what we are trying to do is really transform how we train the next generation of providers and those who are currently practicing as physicians and clinicians. It's not only physicians, but also physician assistants, nurses, registered dietitians, nurse practitioners, but we tried to do this. We tried to get clinicians in the classroom. We, at my institution, we teach our medical students about the art of food and cooking and the science of nutrition and medicine. We teach them
Mhm.
practical skills in the kitchen setting and teach them how to
Wow.
communicate it with their families. It's a skill that they're so excited to learn about because they hadn't seen it. They didn't know it existed. They didn't know how
Okay.
powerful the tool of food and nutrition could be to influence the health of their families and their patients. And so that's what
Right.
we do at our institution. It's really catching fire across the country. And it's one of those gap fillers that really helps us to fill that gap in around nutrition education and medical training. And then again, how do we take that in the practical way into working with our patients alongside our patients and families?
Excellent. That is wonderful. Well, we've heard about the benefits of anti-inflammatory diets. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how you might incorporate that into working with your patients in a cooking class, for example?
Yeah, that's really good. So inflammation is something that happens in the body very easily, and oftentimes it's triggered by the things that we do and the things that we put into our body. A lot of times, a lot of foods that cause a lot of inflammations are highly processed foods. A lot of oils tend to cause it. High amounts of dairy tends to cause it. There's a lot of meat tends to cause it. A lot of these things are triggers for causing more inflammation in the body. One of the things that we want to do is reduce that, what we call fire, this little burning fire that's going on in the body. We want to slow that down. We want to cool it off. How do we do that? Well, we want to consume foods that love our body, that help our body to thrive.
Mhm.
And you talked about that, sort of the idea of incorporating more plants into one's diet. At the end of the day, leaning more towards consuming more plant centeredness in one's diet is always going to benefit one, no matter how much one changes. Talking about small, small changes. You'll see improvements in one's energy level. You'll see improvements in one's focus, one's attention. You'll see all kinds of improvements, even weight change, you'll see improvements as well, right? But at the end of the
Mhm.
day, we cannot just say consume more plants or not meat, right? Because at the end of the day, when I've try to give that simplistic message out to other individuals. I walk by the trash can and I just see donuts, fries, and and candy in there, right? And at the end of the day, I'm not trying to be funny. I mean, at the end of
Yeah.
the day, like people, how you consume that message is not to say demonize meat and just eat anything that's not meat. That's not it.
Right.
What we want to do is consume foods that are whole, real foods. These foods that are less processed or unprocessed are going to be foods that give our body energy, help us feel more satisfied when we eat them, and overall improve our overall health. And that's what we want to try to do day in and day out.
Excellent. Well, I could keep going, but we need to get some audience questions in here because I can't imagine that there aren't any. And to help us with that, I'm going to ask Lila and Wayne to come on back in and to let us know what is going on in the chat.
Hey, lots going on in the chat.
Yes, a whole lot. Go ahead, Lai. You want to start?
Yeah, I saw Yvonne had a really interesting question. Are we eating differently than our grandparents in the African American community?
Oh, good
I'll say
question.
ancestors. We eating differently
Yeah,
than our ancestors.
let's go a little
Right.
bit higher than that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
100%, right? I mean, right now, if you're talking about in America, we're consuming the standard American diet. The standard American diet is not going to lead us in the direction of health. It's going to lead us in the direction of death, in the direction of worsening health,
Disease.
right? It's not helping us. Now, we could say it tastes good, we can say it has flavor, we can say all these different things about it, but oftentimes that's how foods are designed, right? That's how foods are really, they hijack our taste buds to some degree, is what I would kind of
Mm,
describe it as. The foods that we used to consume was consumed more richly around plants, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, legumes, seeds. Like these are the foods that we used to consume a lot more of. And meat used to be more of a garnish, right? Meat used to be more of something we would incorporate for more flavor and different things like that when we had access to it, right? It wasn't something
Mhm.
we always had access to. And the amount we're consuming now is far more than we used to. Even the processing of foods. Processing of food has allowed us to deliver food all around the world more efficiently and more effectively, right? There's benefit there. But at the same time, the processing of foods has also caused more inflammation in the body, has also caused us to not feel satisfied when we eat, has also caused us to have higher insulin resistance, higher risk for diabetes, and all the other things that go along with that as well. So that's what I would say. 100% the foods that we're eating now has changed over the years. And when you see this diet being transplanted to other communities around the world, you see the same thing happening there. Communities that had no blood pressure, high blood pressure, communities that had no heart disease, you bring that diet over, you bring the KFC, you bring the Popeyes, you bring these things over,
Mhm.
all of a sudden, the
Yeah.
health is looking the same. What's going on? It's the food. It's the food.
Right. And I would also say with meats too, as compared to what our ancestors ate, because of mass farming of animals, mass production, the need to make them bigger and meatier, and using steroids and using antibiotics, those things are retained in the meat when you eat them, and so
mhm.
that's definitely a huge difference than what our ancestors consumed as well.
Wow. We have a great question, and it is asked by Michelle Walker Scales. And she says, what do you think about the Mediterranean diet?
Great question. So Mediterranean diet, I think, is one of many strategies that incorporates more plant centeredness into the diet. A lot of people enjoy it because of the rich flavors that it offers. Typically, for those who don't know, you want to think about a few things with Mediterranean diet. Increasing fruits and vegetable intake. They love beans, right? A lot of beans in the diet. Decreasing dairy intake. I don't care what we've been told over the years, how it's going to make us big and strong. We don't need that much dairy. We don't need dairy at all at the end of the day. But if you want to consume it, trying to keep it to less than a cup or two a day is max. Fish here and there definitely can be a part of the diet. Keeping down the red meat, and then you all talked a little bit about the olive oil again, taking it right to the head. The olive oil, right, is a big one with the Mediterranean diet as well, right? Keeping down the sweets, those things. So it is a pattern of eating that can benefit one's heart health. It can benefit one's overall health greatly as well. The thing that I always want to make sure that people understand is by consuming a Mediterranean diet, don't the Mediterranean diet is a cultural diet as well, right? Recognize that your own culture is rich, is full of flavor, full of nutrition as well. You don't have to look outside always to get those rich and healthy foods in your own diet as well. I believe in taking Mediterranean diet principles or taking principles from some of these other things, but not to assume that, hey, as an African American male or family or whatever, I need to eat some other cultural diet because the diet for me, my cultural diet, is not any good. we can do this the right way. We can consume the greens, the food, the rich foods that we eat as well, and really enjoy those and get the benefit of our overall health as well.
The black eyed peas.
Black
I,
eyed peas,
I'm
yes.
I'm so glad you said that, because there was a comment about soul food, too much soul food being dangerous, and I just think that it's really important the way that that food, that is a part of our culture, is prepared. It can be
Right.
delicious and healthful and all of that, but it is about how it's prepared. So I'm really,
Right.
really glad you said that. I saw a couple of comments, Wayne, about olive oil. One of them was, does light olive oil do the trick? And second part is, uh, does it contribute to poor cholesterol if we're adding more oil
Great
to the diet?
question. Great question, Dr. Essel.
Yeah, so wonderful question. So one of the biggest factors that leads to increasing cholesterol is what we call saturated fats, right? So those are going to be saturated fats are going to be more from your animal-based proteins and foods and things like that. That's going to be where you're going to get the majority of that from. Now, olive oil is going to have something called a lot of unsaturated fats. So it tends to have less of what we call saturated fats in them. So as a result, it has less of that sort of negative effect on one's increasing one's cholesterol. I think in general we need to be careful with consuming too much oil in general. Once we start to cook that oil and heat that oil, and if it starts to smoke in particular, we start to lose those positive properties of great oil like an olive oil, and we have to be careful with that. We start to cause more what we call free radicals in the body and cause more harm to our body than good to our body. But in general, as Dr. Mel was talking about, taking some good, you could extra virgin olive oil, balsamic, and using it as a dip, using it in those kind of ways. That's a great way to consume it. Not too much by any means, but those are some
Right.
great ways to consume it. Light olive oil, or light olive oil versus not light olive oil. I think that's more of a marketing gimmick than anything else, right? Like you go to the store, you see a messaging on TV, and you're like, I got to get this kind of thing. And it's really marketing, and it makes it more confusing, nutrition and science more confusing. And sometimes we just kind of throw our hands up because it's like, last week you said this was bad, this week you saying this is good. What should I be
Right.
Right.
doing? If light or not, just pick one
You
and you're
you
will
will
fine.
get some
Typically, we
anti
would
olive
recommend
oil
not cook.
users. You'll get
Yeah,
some
so
anti olive oil users like something else.
the only thing I should say, try not to cook with the extra virgin olive oil as much. It can smoke a little bit quicker. Again, once you see that smoke in the oil, you've cooked it. The heat is too high. You've cooked it for too long. You need to slow that down. You don't want to fry in that. You don't want to like cook heavily in that because again, it's becoming more of a harmful oil. Now it's turning to what we call trans fats, which are some of the worst kind of fats for our body. I'll pause there. Sorry for the
Okay.
detail.
We're
No,
in
that's a
the
great question. What are better oils to cook with?
So better oils to cook with. So you can do a plain olive oil, not extra virgin. That's an okay one to cook with. Some people love the grape seeds and all that stuff. Those have low smoke points, right? So they'll start to smoke really early on. A pretty typical one that a lot of people use is like a canola oil, another kind of vegetable oil that people tend to use. But again, lightly coating, if you're going to use it, lightly coating. You don't have to cook with oil at all. But if you do use it, lightly coating that pan, try not to deep fry. If you want to fry, that air fryer nowadays is changing the game. Although it takes up a lot of counter space, that thing takes up a lot of counter space. But it's a big game changer. Low oil, you get that
Is
still that great crispy taste, that flavor, and it's
Mhm.
something that you want to be shooting for. Again, healthy eating should not be something you force yourself to do and just like I eat salads every day. It's not about that at all. It's about eating high quality, tasty, flavorful foods that love your body back. And I'll pause there, Wayne. It looks like you got one.
Yeah, we're in the speed round now. We have so many questions coming in so little time. I want to get two questions in that I see here. One from Mateo Levine Ledesma. Can you comment on the risk or benefits processed plant-based food products, e.g.,
Mm,
Impossible beef and stuffed Impossible burgers? Can you comment on the risk or
great,
benefits of
great
those?
question.
I have a great study I want to tell you about. But I probably shouldn't because of time. So maybe another day I can talk about it. But at the end of the day, processing is processing, right? Processing is going to be something that can really affect the way the body metabolizes or deals with that food. In general, you want to slow down and decrease the amount of processed foods in general. Now, what some people would say is that if you're trying to consume more plants, those foods can be can be considered more of transition foods, right? So those things, the sausages and the this and the that, use them as transition foods to consume more fruits and vegetables and beans and nuts and all those things. But at the end of the day, you don't want to rely on those things. You don't want to lean heavily on those things because they're heavily processed as well, right? So they're not go-to foods. You can't say, well, I'm gonna have a burger every day because I'm eating more plants now. That's not the way this works. You got to eat real, whole, rich foods. That's how the body benefits and gains from it.
Great.
Okay. We have a question from T. Stroman. T. Stroman says 3 meals a day versus 6 meals a day during the day. What do you say?
Whew, that's a good one. So people used to love talking about if you eat multiple meals a day, you increase your metabolism, right? Maybe a little bit, maybe not. At the end of the day, there's a big movement nowadays around this concept of intermittent fasting, and we can talk about the pros and cons, the effectiveness. We know it works really well in sort of animal species, and there's the evidence is kind of mixed in humans as well. But people swear by it. Anecdotally, when you talk to patients, when you talk to families, people swear by it and they see a lot of great benefits they see from it. One of the benefits there is not consuming food all the time, giving your body a chance to take a break. Let's take it back a few generations ago. We weren't always just eating all the time, right? Like this is a very modern new concept. Snacks everywhere, snack industry throwing stuff at us. We got to eat multiple times a day. Our body doesn't need to consume like that. Let it rest. Let the body do what it should be doing, breaking down those fat cells and breaking down the fat cells all around the body, allowing our body to use the sugar from the liver. Let the body do what it should be doing, and that's going to require us to not be consuming food all throughout the day. Whether you believe fully in intermittent fasting or not trying to consume food all throughout the day is really an important piece for one's overall health for the most part. Now, I will say, if you have something else going on, hypoglycemia, low sugar, all that stuff, talk to your doctor. I'm not going to say you got to talk to your doctor about that.
Right. Plus, it's a little impractical sometimes for many people to
It
eat
is.
6 times a day. Yeah.
It is, but you know what? People tend to just put snacks like in medical school. You saw people just having snacks in their pocket all the time,
You're
just
right.
crazy. And you never get to build real hunger that way. So I work with young kids and
Right.
parents are giving them snacks all throughout the day. They never build a hunger. They say, why they don't eat the food at mealtime? Why they not exploring these
Mhm.
different fruits and vegetables? Why are they not adventurous eating? Because we're consuming food all the time. We don't need to do that. And so we would recommend trying to do that for the most part.
Excellent points.
And this is a quickie, but last one. Valerie Spalding Parker says, "Are potato chips are vegan?"
Great question, answer, comment. Let me respond to that. Vegan doesn't mean health, right? Vegan doesn't mean healthy. Let's get that out there, right? Just because somebody's a vegan doesn't mean they're healthy. Now, consuming more plant-centered approaches to one's diet, be more plant-centered, right? Slanted towards plants is going to be more healthy towards one's body, right? Even when you think about every food type, and again, when I talk to patients, I talk about different, thinking about foods on a spectrum. If you think about even, let's take a chip. There are higher quality chips and there are lower quality chips. If your chip has 15, 30 different ingredients and none of them you can pronounce, it's probably a lower quality chip than getting a potato chip that just has salt, oil, and potato that's fried, right? So at the end of the day, trying to choose better options with whatever meal that's put in front of you and trying to lean towards that, right? Recognizing that making those kind of changes will have, again, big impacts later on.
Right.
Wow. What an amazing show. You are an amazing guest, Dr. Essel. Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. Thank you for getting those audience questions, Lila and Wayne, as always. We probably will have to have you back because I'm pretty sure there are a lot of questions that we didn't get to. So thank you so much, Dr. Essel. Much, much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thank you all for having me.
Absolutely. So, just to close out the show, I want to remind everyone that we have an opportunity here at Excuse Me Doctor to participate with Howard University's research centers in minority institutions. If you are a listener of this show, you can participate in a COVID resilience research study that's going on. Participation is voluntary. It involves filling out a 2-part survey for which you'll be compensated, actually up to $100 based upon the parts that you complete. If you have interest in finding out more, please contact our research assistant, Dana Harvey, at danaharveyresearch@gmail.com, which is DANA Harvey, HRARVEY, research@gmail.com, or call 470-795-0329. So if you're interested in doing that, please go ahead and contact her. So I've moved to the Russ Parr Morning Show on Monday mornings at 7:45. So if you catch me then, fantastic. And if you don't, please catch us right here again Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, right here on Facebook and YouTube. Appreciate your tuning in. And if I don't see you in the meantime, please be wise, be well, and be health empowered. Thanks for joining us.
My name is Dion Davis. I've tried to live my life with no regrets, but I guess my final regret is not getting vaccinated. Please, don't let not getting vaxxed be your final regret.